Hey, friends. If you've been loving the conversations we have here on the All in My Head podcast, and you're looking for a way to ground your thoughts, reflect more deeply, or just make space for yourself in the chaos, I've created something for you. My very own journals are now available on Amazon. Whether it's the gratitude journal to help you focus on the good, especially on the hard days, or the Mind Unwind Journal, a space to release, reset, and realign. These were made with you in mind, my thoughtful, deep feeling, always reflecting listeners. Just head to Amazon and search Gratitude, Mind Unwind Journal, or my name, Jenny Jimenez-Sullivan, or check the link in the show notes to grab your copy. It's simple, intentional, and ready to meet you wherever you are.
Please, allow me to show you something.
Welcome back to the All in My Head podcast. I'm Jenny, and I am your host. And today's conversation is one that I think we secretly crave, but we often avoid. And we're going to talk about death today. And I know that word alone makes you want to turn this off, but I think it's something because I've struggled with it myself my whole life, and it frankly terrified me that I need to talk about it more. Not that I don't still struggle with it, but I feel like this is just what we need to talk about right now. So stay with me, because the truth is that talking about death doesn't make life darker. It makes it brighter and sweeter and more urgent. And it teaches us how to live fully and to love deeply and not take a single breath for granted. So we are here for episode 26, and it is called Why Talking About Death Makes Living Sweeter. My talk with end-of-life doula, Larissa Hall Carlson. And she's going to be here to help guide this conversation, because this is what she does. And together we're going to explore what it means to face mortality with compassion and presence and even some joy. So for my listeners who have been here for a while, you may remember Larissa as my guest for episode 16, Nourishing the Feminine, Ayurveda's Guide to Midlife Wellness. But for those who are new to All in My Head or new to this episode, let me tell you about this wonderful guest. With 25 years of experience, Larissa is a renowned expert in Ayurveda, yoga, and mindfulness, specializing in optimal performance and holistic well-being. A certified Ayurveda practitioner, Ayurvedic yoga specialist, and end-of-life doula. Larissa has spent her career training elite-level musicians, athletes, and executives in mindful living. A lead faculty member for a Center for Yoga and Health and their Ayurveda school for 20 plus years. Larissa previously served as Dean of Ayurveda and co-created the Yoga Journal courses, Ayurveda 101 and 201. Known for her compassionate and insightful teaching, she helps people cultivate balance, energy, and clarity, whether they are high-performing professionals, caregivers, or those navigating life's most tender thresholds. Larissa's work bridges ancient wisdom and modern needs, offering tools for resilience, presence, and well-being. And she's one of my favorite people. So welcome back, Larissa.
Thanks for having me back, Jenny.
So grateful. And I'm going to say that even the last time we talked, when we were talking about your episode 16, we talked about kind of my fear of death and kind of the journey that I have been on to kind of I would say, learn more about death and be more open to talking about it, because it was stressful for me. And I'm quite positive that it's stressful for many people. And that's kind of really how this episode came to be. And I just recently put out an episode in September called Where Grief Lives. And I needed to do that because I felt like, it was important to discuss the heaviness of loss and kind of where we place our grief. And especially because we lost my father-in-law a year ago in July. And it was conversations that I've been having with my adult children and my husband and even my mother-in-law. But why do you think that it's so difficult for us to talk about loss and grief and death?
These are yeah.
Yeah, jumping in.
These are the taboo topics, aren't they?
Mm-hmm.
These, they're heavy, they're intense, and I think they're really tough to talk about for so many people because they are mysterious, right? We don't have all the answers to the questions that these topics bring up, and that can create some fear, and folks often want to turn away. But really, the comfort comes when we lean into the mystery. And as so many scholars and philosophers have shared over the years, to live life fully, to really embrace all of the goodness and joy, we also need to embrace the sadness, the grief, the anger, the shadow places.
Right.
And so I'm really curious about and committed to living fully, really living the full spectrum. And that requires shining some light, paying some attention to those tough, scary, mysterious conversations.
Right. And I think that that's just something that, again, in these past, I would say probably 10 years for me, it's been more of, I need to explore it all. And I don't want to have this constant fear of what that is. And so when we talked, I thought, my gosh, for myself, obviously, but for the listeners who may not know, what is an end-of-life doula? And what drew you to this work? Why do you feel like this is something that that people need to know more about? Because I feel like when we talked about it just a little bit, it gave me such a peace in some of the knowing of what you do. So yeah, let's maybe talk about that.
Yeah, I teach so many things, and I have always been a teacher. I love teaching. Even when I was a kid, I used to play school and make my neighbors fill out little tests and stuff. I've always been a teacher and taught so many different topics. And I just absolutely love sharing yoga and philosophy and mindfulness and breath work and Ayurveda and all that good stuff. And yet, Jenny, the work of the death doula is the most nourishing, the most fulfilling of all the work that I've done. And I do work that I think is really fulfilling in general. And so to really find this, I think, a blind spot in society, talking about the death and supporting death has been a real blind spot and a gap in the market, if you will, and that so many have been suffering through end of life.
Right.
And going through it with great fear and nervousness and resistance and aversion and chaos, honestly. It's often a time where there's a lot of chaos, and it doesn't have to unfold that way.
Right.
And that's the role that a death doula can play. So an end-of-life doula or a death doula, these are the titles for what I do. And this is a growing industry. There have always been people who sort of hold space and support the transition at the end of life. But now, since the pandemic, it has really, really blossomed. And this has become less of a taboo topic. It really is getting into more mainstream conversations, which is really exciting,
right? Because
it can bring so much relief and support and comfort to people. So I'm really, really grateful that there's one silver lining from the pandemic.
Right.
But what a death doula does is really dependent on each individual death doula. Death doula or an end-of-life doula is someone who who can hold many roles for the person who is passing, as well as for their friends and family.
Mm-hmm.
It's very similar to a birth doula, someone who's not a doctor, who's not prescribing medications or doing procedures or anything, but a birth doula is there to support the mother and the family through a very often painful and exciting time of life, a time where there is a lot of chaos, where one is coming into the world.
Right.
And the birth doula helps to calm everyone down and has been through it many times. And so can hold space with comfort and confidence and navigate the obstacles that arise with skillfulness and confidence and ease. And that creates more peacefulness during a time that's really chaotic.
Right.
And so, Jenny, that's exactly what an end-of-life doula does, but at the other side of things.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll pause there, but I'll dig into some of the things that a death doula really can do.
No, and I love that. And I love that comparison of kind of a birth doula and a death doula. And they're seeing these different ends of life, right? The beginning and the ending of life, but they're there for, it is such an important time. And it's so interesting because we talked a little bit about how I feel like now that I've opened myself up to being able to talk about these things and read literature about it and kind of verse myself more and kind of being mindful of living life to the fullest, knowing that that's coming and not being so afraid of it. I've heard so many people talking about death doula or end of life doula, or there was a show that I talked about that it was a podcast before, but about a woman who changed her entire life because she had this sentence coming now to her of, I have cancer for the 4th time and this is my end of life. And how do I want to proceed with the rest of this life? Do I want to live it in this marriage that is very loveless and very draining in a different way? Or do I want to move forward in beauty and light with the people or the persons that I love and surround myself with that until my end of days? And she had a death doula in that movie towards the end. And really it was more for the people that were with her because they were having a difficult time. I think she was ready. They were not. And I also have been hearing more people just talking about this. I don't know if you heard recently, but the actor Rainn Wilson said when he's done acting, he wants to be a death doula. He wants to move in that and be that person to help guide others because he witnessed it. And what a beautiful closure it was for his family and having this person being able to kind of guide them and lead them and let them just be with their family members. So it just seems like now that I've said, okay, I'm going to talk about this a little bit more. Every time I turn around, I'm hearing something about it. And I just find it to be more beautiful the more I hear about it.
Well, it really does, preparing ahead of time and having these conversations and ruminating and contemplating and reflecting on one's thoughts and feelings and triggers and memories of different death scenarios and such. The more that we talk about it, the more that fear is reduced, and sort of facing end of life actually provides, in my experience, just such great peace of mind, like the most important peace of mind, really. Like when we can face the challenges, face the fears, then it opens up a whole different way of living. And so a death doula often comes into the scene when someone is terminally ill, given a terminally ill diagnosis, or in later stages moving into hospice, and the family reaches out to a death doula to support the process. But we don't have to wait that long to work with a death doula. It's actually really beneficial to get one's affairs in order when there's no crisis, when health is fine. And I find that this is more and more what I want to share with people, is that when you're healthy and bright-eyed and bushy-tailed and everything is fine, that's the best time to talk with an end-of-life doula or to contemplate and plan and prepare for one's own passing when it's not urgent.
Right.
Because then it can be done when one is calm, cool, and collected, and we can really take our time with it and move through it with grace and navigate the choices without being in a heightened emotional state.
Right.
Which is unfortunately what happens. Most people don't plan ahead. And when it's time for the end of life care to begin, folks are a little overwhelmed or shocked or surprised, and that creates a lot of scatteredness and often arguments among family members and friends about what should the vigil be like, and where should they be buried, or should they be cremated, and where should they be laid to rest, and what music should be playing, and who gets what, and is the will done, and who's got the there's all this chaos that often happens, and much of that is preventable, so that at the end of life, the family can really and friends can really focus on savoring and saying their goodbyes peacefully, and not having to work with filling out documents and making tough decisions and that kind of thing. So I really want to encourage everyone to have conversations about end of life way before that time may come, because it really takes such a weight off one's shoulders. And when things are in order, and we can talk about that more specifically too, but when things are in order, which will never be perfect, but when things are sort of kind of in order, then there's not a looming thing that needs to be tied up.
Yeah, and it's so interesting because my husband and I had this conversation when my father-in-law passed, but actually it was probably 20 years ago that they had said to us, our plots are paid for, everything, and they're telling us these things, and as people do, because we get together for holidays, they're telling us over a holiday, these things are in order, this is where we're going to do, and you'll have everything in order, you don't have to worry about a thing. And we're just like, okay, you guys are fine, everybody's healthy, why are we talking about this, and we were definitely those people who kind of were like, we don't want to talk about this now, like everybody's fine. But in retrospect, and when my father-in-law passed, my mother-in-law honored him so well and so beautifully because she knew everything that he wanted. She knew every way he wanted to be honored. He was a military veteran. He wanted those honors. He was given those honors. He wanted to be buried in the military cemetery. And every single thing that he wanted and asked for his service, she did. And it was all done so well ahead of time that she just kept saying, did I do everything right? And we were like, it's beautiful. And you honored him so perfectly. But they talked about those things ahead of time. And so that's what she did. And we were kind of like, okay, we get it now. We get it. Like they did this 20 years ago and have been talking about it since. So yeah, I definitely think people need to start doing that and stop being afraid of having those conversations, even when people are well.
What a gift. Yeah, because it really is. Like, folks don't want to have the conversation when everyone's well, but actually you really don't want to have the conversation when things are not going well.
Right.
That's the thing. When there's chaos, when there's pain, when a loved one is hooked up to machines, when a loved one is incapacitated, when they can't express themselves because of an accident or a surgery that didn't go well or something, there are so many different ways that we end. And so we can't expect or rely upon the end of life to always go so smoothly, where the person passing can express all of their desires at the end. And so that's what leaves so much pressure on the family. And they're both then faced with the grief and the shock and the chaos of being in the end of life and the fear and all the sadness, plus having to navigate all the practical and pragmatic decisions. And so we actually, we want to create a different way of looking at these conversations where it's actually ideal, it's optimal to have these conversations when nothing's going on, when everything is fine, when it's a holiday, because it's like, hey, this is my gift to you. I've already planned out my will. Like, and it really does relieve a lot of stress. So I hope that listeners can reflect on that and consider that. Now, in terms of like what does a death doula actually do, or what can a death doula do? There's a big range there. There's a big range. So talking with a death doula when there is no crisis, when it's not right at end of life, a death doula can help a family or an individual or a couple discuss these topics and these choices, like creating a will and making sure that there's a health proxy that's signed, and discussing who should be the power of attorney. An end-of-life doula is not a medical professional and is not a lawyer, so they wouldn't do any of the paperwork, but they help you identify which boxes need to be checked off, Yeah. And so they can help you have conversations about where one wants to be buried, and cremation versus burial, or there's now some other options like composting and becoming a tree and things like that. These are all real options nowadays. Yeah. And so an end-of-life doula can talk about that with the dying person and their loved ones. And then the end-of-life doula also, which is a piece that I really love, can help identify on the deathbed in hospice, is that a space that one wants to be at home for, have in-home hospice care, or go to a facility. So to talk about that choice. And then how does that end-of-life space vibe want to be? Identifying like, who do you want to visit you at the end of life? And do you want certain music to be played in the background? If you're not able to speak, are there certain readings that you'd like to have read to you? Like some of my clients, they want to be read like Winnie the Pooh stories. Others want to be read, different psalms. Some want to be read poetry, and a lot of my personal clients like to be read books that are related to mindfulness and yoga. So they're getting the philosophies right before they pass. And so those are decisions. It's like a wish list, a visual wish list. How do you want the room, the vibe to be when you're on your deathbed, and we don't have to be in crisis to talk about that kind of thing. That can also, Jenny, include like aromas, if there are certain aromas that are really soothing or pleasing, to write those down. Do you want to have lavender in the room, or mint, or lemon, or rose? Are there certain kinds of flowers that you want in the space and flowers you don't like? These are things that family members don't like. They think they know us, but they don't always know us well enough to make those choices. And so for someone to write that down way ahead of time is really, really helpful. And that's a big thing that a death doula does, whether it's years ahead of time or as we're approaching the deathbed.
And that's amazing, because we talked about that. We talked about kind of that, all those little things that you don't think about when you're, in hospice care, and where would you like that to be if that's what's happening. And it gets overwhelming for people when they're having to think about all these little things. And again, like you said, we think we know people, but then we don't. I remember somebody recently, a very close family member, saying, well, something about roses, because you love roses. And I'm like, I do not like roses. And they're like, lavender, also not a favorite scent of mine. I can use that in maybe like an aromatherapy type thing, but to have like a lavender flower, and they're like, I could have sworn you said, and I was like, I know I said like, so it's so interesting that you think you do know people, and then you're talking with them, and then you're like, oh, wait a second, we don't know that. And then also you said helping people prepare their wills and making sure those things are in order. And I talked a little bit about kind of how reading and watching The Gentle Art of Swedish Death Cleaning made me think of all these things that I have packed away that I could be gifting to loved ones now, or getting rid of if they don't want it. And I've really been consciously sitting and doing that, and kind of writing a little note with it, and so that whoever I'm gifting it to knows a story maybe behind it, or the sentiment behind it, but also what other kind of emotional and spiritual preparations can you help with during this time? Because it is so much.
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm glad you shared that, the rose and the lavender thing. Yeah. It's so fascinating. And talking through these choices with an end-of-life doula is empowering and allowing someone, especially folks who work with an end-of-life doula when they've just been given a terminal diagnosis, it allows them to reclaim some control during a situation where they don't have a lot of control.
Right.
And so it can be very, bringing back one's own agency and having some control of like, this is how I want the space to feel.
Right.
And that's so important. That's so important. You mentioned the family heirlooms, and this is another big thing that I really love in doing end-of-life care is the family legacy sort of theme, which is helping people to document stories. And that could be written stories or video or audio stories, or final notes, helping people to write their final notes of thanks and appreciation. It can also be talking through unresolved disappointment or heartache, the forgiveness,
right,
and anger, and helping to even facilitate tough conversations so that there can be peace at the end of life. So an end-of-life doula can hold that space, can actually call the enemy in and make peace, and help to facilitate that kind of conversation, which is so nourishing and really helps folks pass with more peace in their heart, to wrap up those kinds of emotional loose ends at the end of life. But what I love doing is helping people create like scrapbooks or these like ask them questions about different points in their life, and they can tell their history or tell their life story and record it for their family members to have, for grandchildren to have. There's so many different ways that we can do these kinds of end-of-life legacy projects. And one of them is similar to what you've just shared. In so many people have family heirlooms that are just, they're covered in dust, they're hidden in a box, they're not being used, they're not being savored. And I would say that, one of the most important things is to pass along those family heirlooms and knickknacks and tchotchkes, pass those on before it's the end of life, and watch your loved ones enjoy them.
Right.
And see your nieces and nephews use your fine china, that is at the end of life. Often people are bogged down with so much clutter, and the family is left with all the clutter. And an end-of-life doula can really help declutter one's clothing drawers and going through the heirlooms and things like that, and pass that stuff on, give it away to Goodwill, donate it, recycle it, so that at the end of life, there is a lightening of the load, not just for the person passing, but for all the family members who end up like having to go through that stuff if it's not addressed ahead of time.
Right. And knowing kind of the wishes of that person, how it would want to be shared or given away. And I think that was the funny thing over this last Christmas. I was cleaning out the garage and I found the ceramic popcorn bowls that my kids used to have their popcorn out of when we had movie night. Like mom and dad had the big bowl and then the kids had the little bowls. And I saw that and they were still in perfect condition and wrapped up and tucked away. And I said, you know what? My 2 grandkids and my son and his wife would love this. And I wrapped it up and I gave it to them. And sure enough, they opened it up and kids wanted them right away. And my son was like, no, they're going to break and we got to get them home from Georgia to Florida. So let's just look at them. We're going to put them away and then we'll have them when we get home. And my other 2 sons looked at me right away and they're like, where's our stuff? And I was like, okay, first of all, that was a test to make sure that you guys wanted my junk. And they were like, those are memories. We like, yes. Yeah. So what are we getting? And I was like, okay, calm down. Nothing this Christmas, but now I know. Cause I have 3 boys. So I'm like, do they want my china or do they want so now I'm mindfully being able to go through these things and going, I know a memory from this. Or one of my sons specifically when he was visiting said, I remember this, and I've been telling my girlfriend about this tradition we had with this specific thing. Do you still have that? So right away, I was like, I know where that is. So I know who that's going to.
Mm-hmm.
And it's been very healing for me and very nourishing, to feel that even though I'm not saying this is happening tomorrow, well, you never know. But I know that I can give this to my kids and feel a sense of relief and closure and happiness, knowing that moving forward in life, they're going to have that and they're going to have that memory.
How beautiful is that? How beautiful is that? I want listeners to consider right now, like, are there ideas popping in your mind? Are there heirlooms? Are there things that you want to pass on? And make a note right now. And this is something an end-of-life doula can also support, just going through things with that person and helping to identify what's going where, But there's also a great joy. But when my mother was very sick, she's still with us, thankfully. But we did not expect that. We thought her end of life was near.
Right.
And my sisters and I and the nieces and nephews, we all sort of went through her house, and it was just like, open, take what you want. What's here that what do you want to remember grandma by, And it was just so fascinating to see what each grandchild wanted and such, and what my sisters and I each wanted. And when there's no real pressure, it's so much easier to divvy stuff up, especially the things that aren't like incredibly valuable. They're emotionally valuable, but those kinds of things. And it can really be so precious to pass along and see the joy in others, and then know right away while you're living that your legacy, your memories are being passed on, they're being shared while we're living. Right? These are the things that make the talking about death or preparing for death more sweet. Right.
Exactly. And I think that that's so beautiful that you said that. Like, take a moment and write those things down. Like, and I can look at my desk right now and see 10 things that I already know that, like, this child would love that. My granddaughter has already pointed to that and said she loved that. So there's things that I already know that will probably be in a Christmas box or in a stocking soon, because I don't need it and I know who already wants it. But also, what do you think listeners, if they're feeling called to start this journey now while they're well and living, a sweet life, where should they begin?
I would begin just with, a pen and paper. Pull out your laptop and open a blank document and start to jot down ideas. Like right now, asking everyone, do you right now feel like you want to be buried or cremated or composted or turned into a tree? Or there are many other things, but do you already have a sense for that? Do you have a sense for where you want your final resting place to be? Do you have a sense for how you want your last days and hours to go? What do you want that vibe to be like? And, you can always change your mind in a year or in 10 years or in 30 years, but to start jotting down your wishes, like, what are your wishes right now? Start with that. And that's a building block. And you've already begun the toughest part. You've taken the toughest step, which is just being willing to prepare for the future. Right. And that can be such a relief. It can be a little bit exciting, actually. Once we get past the fear of the taboo topic, it's like, oh, yeah, I want to be here. I want to be there. Or I'm not sure. I need to gather more information. And so those are some good, starting points, as well as, create a document that is filled with the practicalities. Like, do you have a will? If not, you can create a will online for free, and there are some very low cost will creation, software that you can use. Or if you have a lawyer that you use, you reach out to your lawyer and sort of get that started. And a health proxy, you can create the health proxy with your primary care doctor in your next visit. Right. So there's very easy things to do to just get those conversations started and start jotting down your wishes so that it's written. That would be where I'd start.
I think that that's perfect, because I I laugh because I probably have 1,000 notes on my phone. And,
Hmm.
we've talked about this. I'm a writer. You're a writer. We're constantly creating things. And that's not one of the lists. I have
Hmm.
lists for everything. That's not one of the lists. But what I will say is, as I was kind of writing notes and coming up with questions and looking at when we chatted pre-production, I was writing notes in the corners here of things that kind of triggered in my mind. So I don't have an open note yet on my phone, but I do have them jotted down in our notes. So it is down on paper somewhere. So that's a good starting point for me, at least.
That's great. It's a great starting point. And I'm still like a pen to paper girl, but I love taking notes on the phone and such. But
Mhm.
I want to encourage everyone to like have a printed piece of paper
Mhm.
that lives in the safe deposit box or lives in a specially colored file in your file cabinet in where your passport lives or something,
Exactly.
something, because even if you tell your loved ones your wishes in a crisis, they may not remember. And it's it doesn't have to be a legal document. It can just be like literally a pen and paper, and you jot down, I want to be cremated. I'd like to be my ashes scattered here. In my final resting days, I want to listen to the Dave Matthews Band. I want lemon scent in the diffuser, or whatever it is. And so writing down those things now, and then notice how you feel going through that process. Like, is there some relief? There might be some tears, there
Right.
might be some fear, but
Absolutely.
but generally the response that most people experience when they begin this project,
Mhm.
this sort of self-care project, is relief. The
Right.
relief, right? Is you don't have to carry it anymore. You don't have to worry about it, and your loved ones won't have to worry. And then there's an opportunity to be more present, right? And to really savor life. And these are the kinds of conversations, the difficult conversations are also things that an end of life doula can hold space for.
Mhm.
Just talking about one's fears,
Right.
talking about the actual process of dying. When, which, if it's not an emergency or an accident or something like that, there's a pretty standard sort of way that things unfold
Mhm.
when one is in hospice. And so to talk through the process of what you might experience, and to discuss pain medications and the route that one wants to take with that, so that we can eliminate fear of being in pain in those final hours, being clear and awake. We can have some agency over that.
Right.
And those are the tough conversations that a lot of end of life doulas hold, as well as, talking about faith.
Mm.
And so many people nowadays have varied spiritual practices. Catholics who do yoga, and, Buddhists who, I don't know, do Tai Chi or something. So like we have often, it's like mixed. It's not just like, oh, I'm a Protestant and this is what I'll do at the end of life.
Right.
People often have favorite churches or synagogues or retreat centers that hold a special place in their heart. And so thinking about sort of the vast spiritual um, reservoir of
Mhm.
comfort that one might have, talking about that ahead of time is really, really useful, because
Mhm.
we often think of end of life as like someone will come and read the last rites,
Right.
or you're supposed to
Yes.
have these certain readings, and it's got to be at
Yes.
this church, and it's going to have this music, but
Exactly.
you actually have so much control over that. And some people want to have an outdoor ceremony, or they want to be by a window when they're passing, or they want to be outside when they're passing, or they don't want anyone in the room when they're passing. Some people want to
Right.
be by themselves, or some want a certain reverend to be there, or a Buddhist teacher, or a mindfulness teacher to hold the space.
Right.
And so these are really, really valuable conversations to have ahead of time, so that the end of life really can be a celebration of life. It can be a time of presence and sadness and mourning, but we take away as much chaos as possible.
And I think that's so powerful, right? And I think it's empowering as well for family, not just for the person who's passing, but for their loved ones to be able to have that gift of clarity and openness and being able to move forward with relief and not carry so much of the burden alone. And I think that that's something that I know my family has struggled with. And I think it, being raised the way we were raised, it was just very standard. You kind of talked about that with certain faiths where it's like, it's this dark room and it's very monotone and we're reading these specific scriptures and we're not going outside the lines. So even in kind of trying to have some of these conversations with my kids as they're navigating, grief because their grandfather was the first big loss to them. I'm seeing them shut it down. And so I have been feeling like maybe going through some of these heirlooms and being able to talk about these beautiful times can help to bridge that gap back to, well, this is kind of a reason why I want you to have this now, but also let's talk a little bit about what's going to happen in the future and how that looks. Because I get a lot of resistance with that. And I get it because I was that person too. So we're navigating it slowly, but surely.
Yeah, it's a step-by-step process. Yeah. Yeah. You have to, everyone's going to be going at their own pace, but I want to encourage people to step onto the path, and begin this discussion and exploration. Yeah.
And it's interesting because, we talk about kind of death doulas and end of life doulas kind of being able to give the gift of presence. We talked about that in our pre-record. And can you talk on that? Can you speak to that gift of presence?
Yeah, an end of life doula is really a mindfulness practitioner, holding space, being present, creating a calm environment. And so an end-of-life doula can be, as I've done before, can be a person who in the hospital or in hospice or at home, I've been with clients who've chosen to pass away at home, can be the person who is greeting visitors and sort of minding the door, watching the door and deciding like how many people are coming in at a time. You can have the end of life doula be a little bit of a bouncer and hold that space and keep the time for visits and really check in with the person passing in the family and see if it's too much or not enough. Who do they want in that room and that sort of thing. So there's this kind of diplomatic holding of space that they can do, as well as I've spent many hours just sitting bedside, holding a hand, looking out the window, playing music for the person on their deathbed, and just being with them and allowing them to spark conversations and choose how much quiet or how much socializing they want. So there's this holding space. And then a lot of what an end-of-life doula can do and what I find to be so precious is holding space or being present for the friends and family and being a kind of calm, grounded anchor during a time that is very scary for folks, as they're saying their goodbyes. And so to be able to make eye contact with visitors and talk calmly and peacefully and oftentimes it's really just about listening to their stories about the person passing or listening to their fears or worries and helping them to come to peace, come to terms with the imminent passing. And so there is this sort of greater perspective that an end-of-life doula brings into the space. And again, similar to what a birth doula does. there can be so much fear of like how much blood and how much pain and what medication and when should the medication come and what if we change positions or should I sit still
Absolutely.
and can I stand up or can there be music? Should I be in the water now? No, get my husband out of the room. No, bring him back into the room, you know?
Right.
And so like there's all that stuff going on during birth. And a birth doula is like the bouncer, you know, it's like the stage manager in a play, like really making sure everything is going according to plan as
Right.
you know as best as one can.
Right.
And a death doula does the same kind of thing at end of life.
I love that comparison with a birth doula. And I say now, as my kids are 33, 28, and 25, you know, when you know better, you do better. And I think I would have done my births very differently. You know, I went in very apprehensive with my first. And by the time my second came around, I was like, okay, I know what I'm expecting now. And that was probably the worst it's going to get. So now it just gets easier. And with my last one, I didn't care who was in the room. It was a teaching hospital. Sure. Parade everyone in and everybody take a look and everyone get some learning on. And it was very peaceful and it was very relaxing. And then there were other people that I just didn't want in the room in my own. It was my husband, myself, and the ins and outs of the doctors. And I just wanted quiet and peace. And it was very much so that way. So I think treating it the same way with death is, again, empowering, and also just takes a load off everyone else from wondering, what do I need to do? No, you can just sit and you can just be with your family member or your friend or your person in that moment, because we have it covered as the death doula. I say we, it's not me. I'm not a death doula. The collective death doula, we, is what I was saying.
That's right. They really, families can really grieve without being burdened by the logistics. And family members can really be present for a meaningful connection, you know, being in a meaningful connection with the person passing instead of being in the spin of being in charge of making decisions. Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And I was even thinking recently how in this year of kind of grief and mourning, how drastically things have changed for me. And I think being this close to it, and I've had lots of people pass in my life, but this being the closest familial person, I've been seeing how my own mind has shifted to more of the mindfulness of living and the beauty in not death, because I honestly feel like my father-in-law left on his terms. And I also feel like it has made me see things in a brighter way and kind of, I've always been the kind of look at the moon and bask in the sun type of person, but I feel like I'm even more heightened and aware to that. And I feel like my connections are stronger and I'm making more concerted efforts to fertilize the soil of friendships and family that I have and grow them in a more beautiful way. And yeah, so I think for me, beauty has just been heightened recently with that. And yeah, do you see that shift in people that you work with? Because you're there through this whole process.
Oh, yeah, big time. And certainly for me as well. And I've had, unfortunately, many close to me pass. I've been sort of surrounded by death for my whole life, which has made it less shocking and allowed me to really savor life. And, you know, in going through the studies, so like I went through my end-of-life training, end-of-life doula training through the University of Vermont. And there are many, many different schools that are offering it now, but that was one of the first ones that was offering a formal training.
Right.
And it was sparked because my mother we thought she was going to be passing. And my husband and I decided to go through the training just to professionally, but just to personally be able to support her more. And the beautiful thing is that becoming an end-of-life doula, that certification required sort of putting our own stuff in order, right? We had to fine-tune our wills and write down all of our passwords and make sure that all of our wishes were written down. And then with that, Jenny, is the, you know, going through forgiveness practices, you know, and cleaning up the emotional, relational stuff
Right.
that often we get like slimed with. We get we get stuck in it.
Mm-hmm.
And that has been so like the most freeing, because like I can pass today. I can pass at any point,
Mhm.
knowing that like I've put my affairs in order, and not just my will
Right.
and what I want to be buried in or whatever. It's
Mm-hmm.
I've made amends where
Mm.
I need to make amends, and I've forgiven.
Mm-hmm.
And it's never going to be perfect, and there's going to be new
No.
things that irritate me, and
Oh,
I will need
you'll
to
be
ask for
human.
forgiveness, yeah, for people. But like right now my conscience is clear, and
Mm-hmm.
like, whoa, that is enormous.
Is it?
That's what makes living life so sweet right now, is like
Right.
there aren't people I need to, at least there might be some blind spots, but as far as I'm aware, I've put things in order
Mm-hmm.
in that way, and had those tough conversations,
Mm-hmm.
and done my own forgiveness practices for
Mm.
people, even without being in conversation with them, just forgiving
Exactly.
them in my own heart.
That's right.
And that's put me in a place of wanting to, like, I just want to enjoy my life, and be of service and savor it.
Mm-hmm.
And going through the journey of putting my own things in order has really allowed me to savor life more, because it's like,
Mm.
what do I have to worry about? Everything else is in order.
Right.
And this is the kind of thing that I see with so many of like the clients and family members who are doing this kind of work for many months, and there's like a 6-month hospice stay or a 3-month hospice stay, where it's like you're putting in time, having these conversations again and again, going deeper and deeper into feelings and emotions and forgiveness, and looking, for many people, it's a time of reconnecting to faith, or saying that a certain faith system actually hasn't done what they wanted it to do, and they find a new thing at the end of life that feels like it's a good fit. So these kind of spiritual, emotional, maybe religious conversations, and it's worth noting that end of life doulas are they're secular. You come in with your own individual belief system, but in the career path, in the role of being an end of life doula, an end of life doula should not sway someone's faith,
Right.
or belief system in any way. They can hold space for any faith or belief or religious belief system.
Mm-hmm.
So they are neutral. They're like Switzerland when they come in. They just hold the space for those conversations, but
Right.
don't push someone in one way, one direction or another. But what I've seen, Jenny, is that so many family members, when they're working with an end of life doula, family members who have been working with me, when their loved one is lingering, that often it's like in hospice, the last week or two can
Mm-hmm.
just seem like forever. So
Mm.
it almost gets to the point of like folks say their goodbyes, and it's like,
Mhm.
why is this taking so long? Right?
Right.
That's a question that comes up a lot,
Right.
like, wow, they seem like they're ready to pass,
Mm-hmm.
why is this taking so long? And so there's an opportunity for friends and family to really come to terms with the passing, and to feel at peace and to feel ready, and then move into honoring and celebrating the life. But if there isn't the prep work beforehand,
Mm.
it can often be very difficult to get into that place of being
Right.
able to honor and celebrate life, and we just are overwhelmed with the shock and the grief and the stress of it.
Right. No, and I think that that's amazing. And I think that, the more I'm a very, well, my podcast is called All in My Head. So I'm in my head, but I'm a very vivid, mind person. Like I can picture things, and I can picture how beautiful it is for people to be able to sit in these moments, but also have questions answered as they're going along, and not have this fear of the unknown or fear of what's coming next, and not feel. I think sometimes when you're talking to medical professionals, you get I know my husband felt that way. He wanted to ask questions to the nurses, but then he also felt very strange because he flew in for one day to be with his father. So he was just kind of like, I need to ask these questions, but he felt also awkward at the same time. Although they were wonderful when they answered everything. And we're very like, oh no, we get that. People ask these questions all the time. But I feel like with a death doula, it's just such a different vibe. It's not so constricted and, I don't know, industrial like a medical professional is. I don't know. That's my opinion. That's how I'm envisioning it anyway.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And they can be a sort of a translator as well to some degree, or support
Yes.
the communication. Yeah. And again, a death doula is, a death doula should be certified and insured.
Uh-huh.
And death doulas have a scope of practice and a code of ethics.
Mm.
And so those who are seeking a death doula, make sure that you do your homework, that you find someone who is insured and is doing this properly and within their scope, so that they're not trying to give medical advice, but they can absolutely support the conversations with the medical team, and should, right? They should be there in collaboration with,
Yeah, you guys can kind of be the medical whisperers. That's
yeah, exactly.
right? The end of life whisperers. And in that, I mean, you talked about being certified, and you said you and your husband both went to UVM and did this training, but also talking about that and the logistics. Is this something that is covered by insurance, or is this an out-of-pocket cost, so that people are preparing themselves for what that looks like? I know in other countries, from what I've read, because other countries kind of do it a little bit better. They're more prepared and ready to talk about these things, as we're just kind of getting here now. What does that look like logistically for families?
That's a great question, Jenny. Yeah, most of it is out of pocket right now. Yeah, I think that as the end of life doula is becoming more and more needed or wanted, I imagine that there'll be some coverage in the future. And it's possible that some states are including it, but I'm not aware of any so far. So it is usually out of pocket, although many end-of-life doulas will volunteer some time. And the prices can range, drastically, to $25 an hour to $200 an hour, depending on what one would do is negotiate with an end-of-life doula as to what tasks the family wants from them. Like, is it just sitting and holding space in the vigil space? Is it being there in the middle of the night so the family can sleep? End-of-life doulas can be almost like an extension of the family in a way, and can hold space or be with the person who's passing while the family goes and has lunch, or goes and runs errands, or gets laundry done, because often the end of life is an extended time. And so family members need to do their errands and get their sleep and nourish themselves and go out for walks. And they don't want to leave the bedside. And so an end-of-life doula can be like a babysitter in that way, like hold that space, call them if something changes, and create a little bit more space for the family, which is really, really valuable to create that kind of support. But the thing would be to reach out to an end-of-life doula and see what kind of tasks they offer, because each doula will have their own favored set, Like, I also include, I'm a meditation teacher, so I will guide meditations if they want that. I'm a breathwork teacher, so I can guide breathwork. I'm a yoga teacher, so sometimes I'll guide family members through some gentle yoga practices to help them release stress and sleep better during this time of stress. And so each doula will have their list of options, and then they'll have pricing, accordingly.
And personally, I've been the recipients of some amazing techniques and things from Larissa, because I do have this injury, and it flares up, and there's moments where can't get out of bed, and Larissa is wonderful at saying, oh, this is a great mindfulness practice, or try this breathing technique, or a specific tea. So a wealth of knowledge and loveliness in the Ayurvedic practices, and also mindfulness. Our body is our temple, and we need to treat it as such. And sometimes we're just not good at that, right? We're not good at slowing down, and then our body will tell us time to slow down. So I can imagine some of the beautiful offerings that you're able to give these families. And I want to touch briefly on caregivers, because I just feel like watching it with my mother-in-law, as my father-in-law battled Alzheimer's, and she was his primary caregiver in the home for 15 years, from diagnosis to the last 6 months where he was in a facility the last 6 months, because it was dangerous for him and it was dangerous for her as well. It was the lack of sleep and not having everything safe and secure in that vicinity in their home. But caregivers just don't get the support that they need. I feel like I do hear of more things, but I just don't feel like it's something that the medical world is good at saying, like, you need a break too. And here are some resources for you. So now we're talking about end of life. And these caregivers don't want to leave their side. I didn't leave my son's side when he was sick. And nurses were constantly going, go home and take a shower, do something. And I'm like, there's a shower in the room. So I'm guilty as well. But, how do you navigate that? Because they're going to want to be there.
Yeah. It's not easy. Each family system will have a different vibe around this and willingness. But, I recognize for myself, I'm still an active caregiver. Mm-hmm. And caregiving myself, I have been through caregiver exhaustion. Years ago, I went through very deep caregiver exhaustion. I was sleeping on the floor, and like right by the bed to respond at any moment in the night, and just exhausted. And there was some obstacle to giving myself what I needed. And I know so many, that permission to take a break, to take the shower, to go for a walk, to have a healthy meal, to hydrate, right? To shake things off. Yeah. I went through a stage where I was just, this was caregiving for a family member and just bending over backwards, right? And right. being depleted by that. And it took a long time to recover from that. But that journey was really informative because I don't do it like that anymore, right. And, I've learned how to care for myself while caregiving. And that was an incredibly insightful journey for me. Right. Was learning to care for myself. And I've actually created a little audio course for folks called Mindfulness for Caregivers, and it's on my website. Yeah. And it's just a little 10-day audio course, about 15 minutes per lesson. And I use research-based mindfulness practices to support stress relief and compassion and boosting inner clarity and things like that. And so for me, Jenny, it was about going through the burnout myself and then realizing that is not sustainable. Right. And it actually wasn't that helpful. In the end, like I didn't have to bend over that much, like I could have called in support. There were plenty of people who were offering support that I didn't take them up on, you know? And so that was a real learning process for me. And now I have a very different perspective. And what I want to encourage caregivers out there right now to consider is there are so many moments in the day that are lost, that can be reclaimed as moments for self. So for instance, in caregiving, there's often several minutes when we're waiting for someone while they're on the toilet, or several minutes while we're waiting outside of a hospital room when they're getting an x-ray or something, or waiting for an appointment to start and just sitting in the waiting room for 15 minutes, or something like that, right? We wait for uploads. We wait 4 minutes for the Uber to arrive. We wait for the elevator to start. And so I want to encourage folks to reclaim those minutes and moments and turn them into mindful minutes and moments, where if I'm in the waiting room for someone I'm caring for, I will, instead of scrolling on my phone or being busy, I will take those moments to close my eyes and do some breath work or do some meditation or take a little stroll up and down the hallway. Exactly. Just a little bit of walking meditation. When they're in an appointment, I might step outside for 4 minutes and just stare at the sky and take some fresh air. Absolutely. So I've learned to reclaim those moments. And, waiting for the elevator, waiting for the upload in a busy day, waiting for someone to answer the phone, there are like 20 seconds here and 45 seconds there and a minute and a half here and 3 minutes there and 15 minutes here, where often we lose those minutes.
Right.
We sacrifice those minutes. We forfeit those minutes.
Right.
And I want to encourage folks to reclaim those moments and minutes. And if you get 50 seconds here and 25 seconds there and 15 seconds there, at the end of the day, you're going to have half an hour of self-care.
Exactly. And
right? Half an hour of mindfulness, right?
Caregiving.
Yeah. While caregiving,
Right.
it is essential to practice self-care. We must fill up our own batteries before giving our energy to others. It's impossible to sustain a rhythm and a tempo that is exhausting.
Yeah, you can't pour from an empty cup, and you hear people say that all the time, but when you've done it and you've been a caregiver, you realize how depleting it is. And until you're in it, and again, I said when I was a caregiver for my son, when he was going through his cancer treatments, I refused to leave that room, and nobody was going to take care of him. The nurses had to take care of him, but I was going to be there. And I remember finally, and it probably was a month into his treatment or 4 weeks into his treatment, and one of the nurses said, well, they're doing massages for parents down the hall, so I need you to get up and go. And I was like, I absolutely am not leaving this room for a massage. That's ridiculous. And what do you know? 15 minutes later, somebody came in with a massage table and they're like, we're here. So you can stay right by his side. As a matter of fact, we're going to pop it up right next to his bed. You can hold his hand if you want to, but you are still getting a massage because you need it. And I remember my husband coming in from work that night and going, you look like a different person. And I just fell apart in tears. And I was like, I didn't even realize the weight of the world that I was carrying on my shoulders until they were in there popping those knots. And no, I wasn't leaving his side, but the nurses were like, no, you're still getting some self-care because you need it and you're not going to be any good to him if you continue. And my 2 other children that I still had to take care of, you're not going to be any good to anyone if you're in pieces in here, just breaking down second by second. And I'm so grateful to them still to this day. And it's 20 some odd years later, I think about that and I go, wow, they really were thinking all the way around. Like, this is a long haul. This is a 3.5-year battle that you're going to be ahead, against. So take care of yourself.
Yeah, right. It is a marathon, not a sprint. Yeah, right. Most of the time.
Right.
And also, the self-care does prevent the accumulation of resentment. Caregivers can also often hold a lot of resentment that they're not able to live their lives during the time of caregiving. And sometimes that's true. Sometimes caregiving is a sacrifice, and there are going to be times where, you do have to bend over backwards a bit and really, really give your all. But there are so many moments and hours and days when that kind of rigor is not actually needed.
Right.
And I want to encourage caregivers out there to really lean into your support systems and the resources that you have. Talk to social workers at the care facilities and hospitals because they often have support that you may not be aware of.
Right.
Someone who can come in and just sit by your loved one's side while you go and take a shower, things like that. And Jenny, we need another podcast just for caregivers, actually. It's like, whoa, it's so big.
That I wrote a note down right here because we've seen it. I've lived it. You've lived it. I've watched it with my mother-in-law and other family members. So we do. I feel like we really do need to talk about that whole caregiver system and what they need and how they can do that. So I put another note. So who knows, is Larissa going to be a three-peat on all of my head? Very possible.
It's very possible.
Very possible. I want to kind of circle back and talk about, preparing and also kind of mindset of talking about death and the preparation for, and I'm going to give a little bit of a story about how, I didn't talk about death growing up, I don't know, we just showed up at a funeral. You were told what you had to wear. You were told you had to go and say goodbye to this person. And it was very dark. It was very sad. It was very ominous and very heavy. That's what I distinctly remember about losing people growing up, uncles or close family friends. So it was something that I just didn't talk about. And if my husband would say to me, he had no problem and has no problem talking about death, but he would say, well, what do you want? And I'd be like, I don't want to talk about it. That's what I want. Like, I want you to stop asking me questions. But then just to, kind of stop him from talking about it, I'd say, just prop me up against a tree and leave me there. And he's like, I'm pretty sure that's illegal. So we can't do that. So what do you really want? And again, I would just, I only had this one vision of things, right? And so the first little glimmer that I got of something different was a very close family friend who had passed. She was like a second mother to us growing up. And so when she passed, her family was very, very adamant that she wanted people to wear colors and bright colors. That's what we knew her for. That's how she always looked. She didn't wear dark colors. She was very bright and always had makeup on. And so it was very much, please wear bright colors on the day of her funeral to honor her. And they even played the song by Joan Baez, De Colores, at the funeral, at the gravesite. And I remember having this argument with my mother because she was like, absolutely not. I am not wearing colors. That is unhinged. I mean, she was like, we wear black and that's it. And I said, you're not honor. She said, my mother said, you're not honoring the person if you're wearing colors. And I said, no, you're not honoring the person. So you're wearing black. And they didn't want that. And literally, she was the only person there wearing black.
Wow.
And everyone else was there. And when they played De Colores, I thought it was beautiful. Of course, we cried. But it was very beautiful. So that was my first little glimmer. And I mean, my mom was mortified because that's not what she grew up with. And I just remember that. And I remember even my husband who was with me, he was just like, I get it. I get why she wanted that. Everybody knew her that way. And that was important to honor her in that way. But then secondly, I think my biggest moment where my mind shifted was losing a very close family friend. Her kids went to school with my kids growing up. And she had a very harsh battle with cancer. And she passed she was probably 38. Maybe 40. And so that was very kind of in my face and very surreal to think of someone that young that passed in such a tragic way. And going to her funeral, and it wasn't a funeral, it was a celebration of life. And at first it was very weird for me because it was, I mean, I can see it now in my head. It was a beautiful sunny day. The church was so bright and there was a glow in there and there were so many people there to honor her. It was out the door. The halls were covered in people and it was music. I mean, worship music, but beautiful secular music that she loved and people telling stories and people just really celebrating her life and honoring her. And people were laughing and telling jokes about her. And it was so beautiful. Like I left there feeling a completely different way about what saying goodbye to someone is, or making it a celebration of life as opposed to like, it's dark, it's sad, it's gloomy. And I never talked about these things with my husband. And I distinctly remember sitting in the bed at the end of the night that night and saying, that's what I want. And he was like, what do you want what? And I said, I want a celebration of life like Diane's. I want people to remember me for being the happy person that I am, for the person who tries to spread, a smile and to be kind of the jokester. And, I want that. I want people to know I love music. I want music. I want it to be happy as it can be in a time where you're still saying goodbye to somebody. But I don't want it to be this dark and sad and gloomy thing. And he just was kind of like, okay, you've never spoken about anything before. And now you're like, that's absolutely it. And I was like, I just want it. I want it to be, I want my death to be how I lived, is what I said to him. And I remember even writing that down in my journal, which I've recently dug up. And I said, I don't live in a sad way. And I try not to. I try to be as positive as possible. So I want my death to be as much of that, as a reflection of my life. And so, now here we are, like doing a whole podcast episode about it.
Well, and I can say like that. I would imagine that there would be a celebration of your life with music and things like that. Jenny, like
you still never.
Yeah.
We were planning for months.
Right. And this sometimes for folks it can sound like we're washing away the sadness or like ignoring the grief, and it's not so.
No.
Right. A celebration of life and having colors if that's what someone wants, and music if that's what they want. There'll still be sadness and tears and loss and grief and reverence and respect. But with a bigger cosmic perspective, really, that death is not a failure, it's part of life. Right? There's a philosophy here, which is not a faith or a religious stance, but death is part of life. Everyone will come to the same end. And what one of my mindfulness teachers said is, he says, everyone we know will pass in unexpected ways and in no particular order. And so when we can come to terms with that reality, which, is not an easy thing to come to terms with, but when we can sort of kind of accept it, like when we can recognize it, when we can hear that, then then when death comes, whether it is an accident or a terminal diagnosis or something, that it is not shocking. Right. We want to reach death, the death of loved ones, without it being shocking, because everyone will pass. Right. It will still be incredibly disturbing and sad, and the grief and the mourning is necessary. But when we recognize, really, truthfully, like when we can come to peace with the fact that death is part of life, it's not a failure, then it's not such a blow, right? It doesn't feel like such a blow when it happens. There can be a peace with it. And from that peacefulness, the celebration and the ability to really honor and celebrate and live into the joyfulness and the vibrant nature of the person who's passed.
Right. And I think that's so important. I think it's honoring that person. And I've found myself already, as where we've been talking about my father-in-law so much, and my youngest especially has wanted like stories, like tell me your favorite story about him. And things just keep coming up. And I'm like, I have to write this down. Write this down so that I can tell them, or they have my journals to go back on. But, there's stories that are coming up, and my husband's like, he absolutely told you that. I said, your dad was a talker. And he told a lot of stories. I mean, I distinctly remember tons about the Navy, tons about the police department. He was a police officer. And I'm like, do not remember that story. Need to write it down. And then I have to call Bennett, our youngest, and tell him that, because he will think it's hilarious. And I think he needs that. I think it's important for him to kind of hear some of these silly anecdotes that we're like, he was a very rigid person in the sense of, he was a police officer and a military man, but then some of his goofiness and things he did in his childhood or as a teenager, I'm like, they need to hear that. Like, it makes him more human and more to relate on a different level. Like, oh man, I did some of that stuff too. And, we can joke that it was in the genes or whatever, but yeah.
And it doesn't always like for some listeners, writing it down might feel overwhelming, but you can do a voice recording on your phone and send it as a voice message or, that kind of thing too. Or a video. Yeah.
Right. So I think that that's a good place to kind of start our wrap to the end is, for those who are listening who may still be afraid and they still get that feeling that tightens up their throat. Like I was very guilty of, when they hear the word death. What's one gentle step that they can take today, that we can take today to just soften the fear a little bit?
I want to encourage listeners really to breathe into that tightness around the heart.
Mm-hmm.
And if tears or screams are the response, that it is all right. It is all right. It's natural to have fear around it and aversion and tightening and resistance. It's very natural, very common. You're not alone. And there is a way through that as you breathe into it and just have the courage to listen to these conversations, to engage in these conversations, to breathe into these tough thoughts and feelings. There is an opportunity for you to feel spacious and warm in your heart and calm in your mind around a topic that perhaps never elicited those kinds of feelings before.
Right.
There is a different way. It can change if you allow it to change.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So the key is like feel into it, be with those emotions, breathe into them, and they will transition, they will shift into something much more beautiful and comfortable.
Yes, just honoring feeling, right? Honoring whatever feelings are coming up. I did a podcast episode called Permission to Feel. And it's been that journey for me of honoring whatever feelings I'm feeling and feeling through it and breathing through it. For me, journaling is a huge release. So I'm able to kind of, and writing is a very therapeutic way for me to process feelings, but honoring whatever's coming up because there's no wrong or right feelings. Your feelings are valid.
That's right. And, sometimes even Jenny, folks can feel like we're talking about this now, but there can be a disappointment or shame or embarrassment around how they navigated other, deaths in the past.
Mm-hmm.
And that may be a whole journey of healing from that. And we can heal from that by honoring the next one, by preparing for our own passing, by seeing life and death from a greater, wider, more vast perspective.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I say it again, when you know better, you do better. Yeah. I say all the time, there's ways that I wish I had processed through a certain situation in a different way. But the way that I process through things now is because I've done the work and I've gone through the journey and I've sat in those dark spaces or done shadow work or whatever it was happening at that time. I processed it in a different way to be able to come to this end and look at it with fresh eyes. So yeah, there's no shame in any of it. It's all beauty and learning.
Yeah, and having, if there is some trauma around there, to seek out professional, support and help is strongly encouraged as well. Because sometimes the talk therapy or MDMR, did I say that right? Those kinds of things can be really, really helpful too in this end.
Absolutely. Huge fan of therapy because it has helped me in tremendous ways. So please, whatever you need to support, it's all out there for you.
But they've done the hardest job, like those still listening. Yeah, you're still listening. You're in the conversation. And
absolutely.
And just listening to you share, Jenny, and thinking of the things that I've shared and haven't shared, there's a whole range of emotions that come up. And that's what life is, and embracing that range of like the joy and the silliness and imagining the music and the colors and things. I have some similar stories to that one story you shared. And like that's allowing us to live fully, to really embrace all the goodness and all the tenderness of life.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that for me, I said after 50, a lot of perspective in my mind has shifted. And I think I've just been more open to talking about things that scare me or trying things that scare me. This podcast being one of them. Stepping into areas that may be unknown or talking with people that have a different mindset, but learning from them. It's all just been a beautiful growth process for me. And I think it's only going to make the remainder of my days sweeter.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yes. And I want to leave it at, is there anything else that you feel, or even if it's just one piece of wisdom you can leave with our listeners as we wrap here on life, death, and presence, maybe kind of in a nutshell?
What pops into my mind is really just sky gazing. It's just the night sky is really what popped into my head. And I'm a big stargazer, and the space is so stable, right? Life is changing all the time, and the temperature, the environment, the weather, the seasons, our own stressors, things are changing all the time, but space is very stable. And so gazing at your favorite constellations, gazing at the moon, meditating on the dark indigo night sky, there is something that's so everlasting, eternal about the cosmos, and I find so much comfort when I look at the sky. I really do. And so I find answers there. And when I'm feeling stuck, there is motivation and inspiration that I find in the night sky.
Absolutely.
And so for those who are feeling, a little tunnel vision, feeling a little drawn inward, a little tender right now, worried, confused about how to move forward, caregiving, exhausted, depleted, frustrated, overwhelmed, in sorrow and grief, perhaps there is some ease and harmony and tranquility that you can find and reconnect to just by giving yourself some time with that evening sky.
Absolutely. I do it a lot. There's a lot of moon pictures, a lot of pictures of the sky on my phone, and just sitting out and being able to feel, I don't know, it just feels very calm to me. It feels very spacious. It gives me a feeling of like being able to breathe more fully. So I love that as an answer. See, I knew she would wrap it the most beautiful way, because death is not morbid. I mean, I think what we want to end on, I think, it's not morbid. It's really life affirming. It's acknowledging and being able to plan for the end. That's going to help us live more freely and present and at greater peace in our moments of life that we're living right now.
And that's guaranteed right there. That's guaranteed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. On that. That was so great. I want to thank Larissa for always being open. Larissa's the busiest person on the planet. And she always makes time for me to be able to have these conversations and to be able to share just some beautiful perspectives that even I knew nothing about. It was all new to me, and it's just opened up. I feel like I look at things with fresher eyes because of our friendship. So I want to thank you for that. And thank you for being able to talk so freely and openly and make us all feel at ease with a conversation about death and end of life.
Thank you, Jenny.
So, listeners, if today and this episode resonated with you, I would love for you to share that with me. Please leave me some comments, message me. I love getting messages back on how a specific episode resonated with you. It's growing these conversations that kind of make us all feel connected. But also, some of this was heavy and maybe new to you. So please take some time to sit with those feelings and about death and about dying, and open up a journal if that's what, resonates with you. Or open up a voice note, like Larissa said, and write about it, talk it out. What emotions came up as you listened to this conversation? What may have stirred in you? And if you want to go a little bit deeper than that, maybe write about a living will, not just about your medical choices, but maybe about how you want to live now and what would it include for you. And I know that I already have my journal open. I've written these questions down, and I'm going to be digging deeper into these questions for myself and with my family. So until next time, remember, life is fragile, but that's what makes it beautiful. And talk about the things that matter, even the ones that scare you. As a matter of fact, especially because they scare you. Thanks for listening to the All in My Head podcast. Have a beautiful day.
Let's go.
Listen to the All in My Head podcast on Spotify, Apple Music, and wherever you get your podcasts.